eyes of the public, he starts to be seen as a hero rather than a villain.
Can the police put an end to Yip Kai-foon's reign of terror? Or will he rule as Hong Kong's King of Thieves? On 9th June, 1991, Hong Kong's Kwun Tong neighborhood is gearing up for a new day. The stores are crowded, and it's business as usual. Suddenly, a car screeches to a halt in front of a jewelry store. 4 masked men jump out. One of them brandishes a deadly AK-47 rifle. The men storm into the jewelry store and overpower the store employees. As one bandit stands guard, the others grab the jewels and watches. The operation is executed in military style. The robbers pin down the police as well. Senior Superintendent James Elms is in the police precinct next door when chaos breaks out on the street.
There was a shootout where many rounds were fired, were exchanged. And the police were by and large sort of held at bay by these much more high-powered weapons. So we were outgunned. And therefore, I mean, it was quite depressing for the guys at the time.
Armed and dangerous, the gang does not just stop at this one store. They loot 5 jewelry stores on that very day.
They would spray bullets with AK-47 assault rifles above the heads of passers-by, striking fear into anybody in the vicinity.
Cliff Buttle, a reporter with the South China Morning Post, recounts that dramatic day when the Kwun Tong neighborhood was under siege for nearly 3 hours.
The daring manner in which these robberies were carried out, almost inviting a confrontation with the police, and then escaping with valuables worth millions of dollars.
The gangster and his men escape, leaving behind a long trail of destruction. And as the gang leader makes his bold getaway, an image is captured on a surveillance camera. The image is Hong Kong's dramatic introduction to Yip Kai-foon, one of the most notorious jewel thieves.
The picture of him, which appeared at one of the robberies, in which a figure is seen crouching in what was said to be a People's Liberation Army and military stance with this AK-47. That is said to be Yip.
The daring bandit spreads terror with this dramatic escapade, severely damaging the reputation of Hong Kong police. The Kwun Tong robbery was Yip's most infamous heist, but few realized that Yip Kai-foon was already a career criminal, whose journey began 10 years earlier when he first arrived in Hong Kong. Yip Kai-foon was born and raised in Haiphong, in the Guangdong province, mainland China's southern province, and a gateway to the outside world. At that time, China and Hong Kong had a permeable international border. It was a paradise for smugglers.
The border between Hong Kong and China was really quite lawless. There were smugglings going on, vehicles were being stolen wholesale from Hong Kong and transported across the border, people were being smuggled and transported across the border, and arms were being smuggled into Hong Kong, either on hire, believe it or not, by the unscrupulous members of the military or the security forces.
The seeds of Yip's criminal career are sown in this wild border town in Guangdong. No one knows much about his childhood, but it may not have been an easy life for Yip as a teenager.
At that time, human relations between friends and families were very loose. Life was really very hard at that time, and you don't get what you want by hard working. maybe you've got to fight for it, most likely using force.
During the 1960s, Guangdong province was infamous as the breeding ground for thugs. Young Yip may have watched the defiant life of gangsters from up close. The business of illegal drugs thrived, and guns were easily available. Mobsters may have been the only real role models for young children. By the time Yip grew up to head for Hong Kong, he had already been fascinated with the world of mobsters and perhaps picked up his first lessons in crime. In the early 1980s, Yip Kai-foon moved to the island to earn a better living.
He stole into Hong Kong as an illegal immigrant. He is a native of Hai Phong. It is very much a sort of a fishing, farming sort of location. And traditionally, well, up till about 1980, people from that particular part of China, or Guangdong province, usually when they came to Hong Kong, involved themselves in either menial work or as laborers.
At that time, Hong Kong was a British colony and its economy was thriving.
At that particular era, Hong Kong was just starting to boom in terms of trade, in terms of the stock market, in terms of tourism, and therefore we had a lot of goldsmith shops opening, banks, emporium.
At first, Yip tried to make his living doing odd jobs and sometimes working as a construction worker. But with limited education, he has little chance of finding a decent job.
We know from his antecedents that he was only educated to about primary 3, so he probably wasn't very good at reading and writing. He came to Hong Kong, like so many other people that came to Hong Kong, in order to find a future for himself. Now, he could not find a future for himself doing what he did because of his lack of education, because of his lack of contacts, perhaps.
Hong Kong's glitz and glamour captivated Yip and stirred a sense of frustration inside him.
He was dissatisfied because he thought he was destined for better things. He came from a large family as well. He was probably impoverished, probably living from hand to mouth. I think that if I went to somewhere from some place that was impoverished, and this place suddenly sparkled with money and gold and everything, and then if I see, all right, if I do 10 hours of honest work, I get paid poor wages.
It doesn't take long for Yip to realize that there's an easier way to make money than working as a daily laborer. He realizes that crime can pay, and in Hong Kong, there are easy pickings.
The awareness as far as crime prevention was concerned was, I think, very low on the scale. And people generally paid very little notice to sort of, for example, installing bulletproof glass, unbreakable glass, and so on. And then if I see somebody else holding a hammer, or read the papers and somebody else holding a hammer, going into this shop and just breaking the glass and taking a couple of trays and make off with maybe about $30,000, $40,000. So where would that leave me?
Yip begins planning his first big heist in 1984. He starts recruiting young thugs and finds that perfect jewelry store that they could raid as their first big target. Yip Kai-foon, the most infamous jewel thief of Hong Kong, first came to the island from mainland China in search of a better life. He started out as a construction worker, but his desire to earn quick money and become rich lures him into a life of crime. Officer Gregory Lam was working with the Intelligence Crime Bureau when Yip Kai-foon made his first mark as a jewel thief.
Gang members are all come from China. They grew up together and they understand each other better, and they really act as a gang and not individual members.
Yip Kai-foon and his men now start looking for targets. They finally settle on the King Fook store in Kowloon District. King Fook was known for its collection of expensive Rolex watches and fancy jewels. But most importantly, the store's security looked easy enough to break into.
Security guards for goldsmiths at the time was, I think, by and large, quite sparse. They weren't as prominent or as plentiful as they are now. It was quite easy going in and just smash and grab.
But Yip wants to make sure his first big job goes without a hitch. Instead of smash and grab, it'll be shoot and grab. On 10th October 1984, Yip and his gang storm in, guns blazing, terrorizing the employees. No one had seen firearms being used in a heist, and this daring display of weapons shocks everyone.
He had the experience of using the firearms, and he would not hesitate to use the firearm whenever he is required to do so. At that time, because of the Cultural Revolution, there were actually many firearms being used around the country, and therefore, at an early age, they were exposed to the use of firearms.
Had all this gold laid out under the counter, covered by just thin glass. Broke the glass and snatched maybe a couple of trays worth, which by count was maybe, $100,000 worth?
Yip Kai-foon steals close to 1,200,000 Hong Kong dollars worth of watches and jewelry. It's a fortune for this small-time thug. Yip and gang immediately plan their next target. Within a month, Yip and his gang raid the Dixon jewelry store in the same neighborhood, again using firearms. This time, they get away with loot worth nearly 100,000 Hong Kong dollars. Yip's brazen use of pistols creates panic among the local jewelry store owners in Kowloon District. He wasn't doing things the old-fashioned way. Yip and his gang soon become notorious.
Yip's nickname was the Big Criminal. I think it's mainly because he had committed many big crimes. Most of the crime he committed specialized in the use of firearms.
Yip's heists get more audacious with time. He's now a big player in Hong Kong's underworld. He's soon known as the Daredevil Jewel Thief, who is believed to be conducting his deals of stolen goods right under the nose of Hong Kong police. And every time, he vanishes without trace, humiliating the authorities. Two months after the King Fook robbery, Officer Gregory Lam is sent to ramp up the police investigation. He knows he is dealing with a different kind of criminal.
When he committed his robbery, he and his gang is very, very well trained. They act quickly, and they can finish the job within a few minutes.
But Yip Kai-foon is hard to find. With few clues and little information to go on, Lam relies on his network of informers to keep their ears to the ground. Yip clearly has a thing for Rolex watches, and the gangster has to sell his stolen goods somehow.
My department at that time was collecting intelligence in all sorts of crime. Whenever we hear something which is being offered in the market illegally, it may be counterfeit money, it may be stolen watches.
Finally, Lam's network of informers get their first clue. It's a tip-off on a deal of Rolex watches.
Actually, one of the informer came to me and told me that there is stolen watches for sale. I would always try to get a sample of the property so that I can identify which case it belongs to or what crime had been committed. Once I can identify who the sellers are, of course, I would mount an operation.
Lam now focuses his attention in identifying the seller of the watches. All clues lead to Yip Kai-foon. During that time, no other robber had stolen such expensive watches from Kowloon in 2 consecutive robberies. Lam puts together a team to execute a buying operation and picks one of his most daring officers, Sergeant Lee Kwong-ming, to lead the undercover operation.
就係嗰啲阿 Sir 開完會啦，咁就係同我講我嘅直屬嘅主管，光明，依家阿 Sir 又揾中你啦，就係揾你一單嘢你要做嘅。我話 Sir 咩事？咁你入嚟個房度先啦。咁我就入去個房嗰度，咁佢就同我講，嗱，佢依家咧就係有一單咧就係知道係賣賊贓嘅。
A police informer acting as a middleman sets up a meeting with Yip's gang for Sergeant Lee. A meeting place is finalized. A deal is struck for 10,000 Hong Kong dollars. Lee will pose as a buyer to ensnare Yip.
你就唔好唔見咗啲錢，話咁啊呢個責任咧都幾大下㗎。嗱，你啊對你好有信心啊，俾心機去做啊咁樣。
Sergeant Lee and another undercover police officer meet the seller at an abandoned construction site. They're prepared to deal with the gang, but to their surprise, the seller comes along with the stolen goods. Sergeant Lee Kwong instantly recognizes the seller. It's none other than Yip Kai-foon. Yip seems edgy and suspicious, but when he sees the money, he's distracted. He insists on counting the money in the car with Sergeant Lee.
度咧，咁我哋落咗車嘅時候咧，佢話：呢啲人埋得嚟，一個人埋嚟帶啲錢埋嚟咁我一個人咧就行埋到間車嗰度。
Lee knew that he was dealing with a dangerous criminal here, but he had already prepared his colleague for any eventuality. As soon as they sit in the car, Sergeant Lee gives the bag to Yip.
咁我就喺個袋嗰度，即刻拎10萬蚊俾佢，一沓10萬蚊，咁佢就話：我話喂，嗱啲錢喺度。咁我就數俾佢睇，咁跟住咧，佢仲係拎住支槍周圍望喎。
Seeing the gangsters busy counting the money, Sergeant Lee decides to make his move.
咁佢先至見到啲錢咧，就攞住呢10萬蚊咧，就縮開隻手，攞嚟肥下啲錢啦。肥嘅時候咧，我發覺即係機會啦，一撲埋就搶佢支槍啦。哎呀，差人，跟住撳個掣，即係通知咧就係其他啲人啦。
Lee reveals his identity and tries to grab the robber. There's a scuffle as Yip goes for his gun.
咁啊攞支槍對住葉繼歡個頭，咁啊葉繼歡就掹嗰支槍出嚟，就向翻佢，咔咔，嗰個差人咧就話：你舉手啊！如果唔係我開槍打死你㗎！咁佢孭一個頭孭晒，佢仲拎支槍出嚟咧，對住佢咧係咁咔咔。咁啊，我即刻攆住個輪瓜，同埋揦住個槍管，個輪瓜咧，嗰個吉雞咧就卡住我隻手，又卡到我頭流晒血㗎啦，已經仲俾佢揼咗多錘。
Sergeant Lee Kwong and his colleague finally overpower the suspect and make their arrest. It is a moment of triumph for Officer Lam and his team.
It was a very successful case for the police, of course, because he had committed so many robberies, and eventually we can gather sufficient evidence to charge him for all those offenses.
In 1985, Yip Kai-foon is sentenced to 18 years and sent to the heavily guarded Stanley Prison. On August 24th, 1989, after serving almost a quarter of his sentence, Yip is rushed from his cell in Stanley Prison to the Queen Mary Hospital. He claims that he's suffering from acute stomach pains.
4 years later, when he was in prison, he complained to the authorities that he was suffering from stomach pains. The custodial ward where prisoners would normally be kept was full. So this notorious criminal was put in a general ward.
Inside the hospital, 2 police sergeants stand guard as a handcuffed Yip is treated for appendicitis. Both the guards and the hospital staff are clueless of Yip's real motive. He has faked his illness. It's all part of an elaborate plan. The gangster knows that he needs to make a move before he's shifted out of the general ward. But with the handcuffs on, there's not much he can do. Yip now waits for an opportunity. He suddenly says he has to go to the washroom. The guards debate if they can trust the gangster, even in his illness. There's a moment of hesitation before one of the guards decides to uncuff Yip. The officers escort the prisoner to the washroom. Yip knows it's now or never. He insists he's going in alone.
There came a time when his handcuffs were removed. He took the opportunity and to make a run for it.
Once inside, Yip moves quickly and escapes through a window. As soon as he's out, he makes a run straight for the road.
Out of the hospital and jumped into a car driven by an unfortunate gentleman who was coming along to pick up his wife from the hospital. This man had his 6-year-old son in the car. Yip jumped in, told him to drive, and they headed towards Aberdeen. During the course of the journey, Yip told this man that he wanted to change clothes with him, which he did. Then, as they approached Aberdeen, Yip told him to stop. He calmly jumped out of the car and boarded a bus, disappeared.
Yip Kai-foon's daredevil escape from the hospital makes front-page headlines in Hong Kong.
Whenever a prisoner serving a long sentence of imprisonment manages to pull off a daring escape, it attracts great interest. Perhaps there is a part of us that is impressed by the ability of a criminal who is in prison to escape in this manner, no matter how much we deplore the crimes that he has committed.
Although they can't be sure, police believe Yip Kai-foon escaped across the border into mainland China. Many believe he's gone back to his home in Haiphong in the Guangdong province.
China was his homeland. Once he goes back to China, he doesn't have to rely on the Chinese mafia. I think he can do it all by himself.
In August 1989, Yip Kai-foon, one of the most defiant jewel thieves of Hong Kong, dramatically escapes from the Queen Mary Hospital. The police suspect that he's returned to China, where he already has a strong base. The mainland at that time served as the perfect hideout for the gangster.
China at that time did not have any extradition treaty with the British government. So that was a plus. I mean, once when you went over the border, you were, strictly speaking, safe. The other reason is because the border, as far as Hong Kong and China were concerned, is not a very long border, but it's a very complicated and difficult to police border.
The Hong Kong-Chinese water borders were notoriously leaky. Another opportunity for Yip to slip in and out of China using high-powered speedboats.
We call the Dai Face. Dai meaning big and Fei meaning flyers, so big flyers. And they had something in the order of about 4 or up to 8 very powerful outboard engines, which no marine police launch or boat could ever even think about catching. It's like driving a bus trying to catch a Ferrari, for example. So it was not difficult to commit a crime in Hong Kong and then hightail it back across the border into China.
But the mainland wasn't just a safe haven for Yip Kai-foon. It also became his main source to acquire arms and ammunition.
Yip could have acquired his weapon as a means of hire from some unscrupulous member of the military or even the police over in China at the time, or he could have stolen it. He could have acquired it through other means. There are several channels for this at the time.
It isn't by accident that the gangster settles for one of the most brutally efficient modern weapons, the AK-47 rifle. At the time when Yip used the mainland as his base, China was a major highway particularly for illicit AK-47 assault rifles, smuggled originally from the former Soviet Union. It's no surprise then that Yip favored this deadly weapon. Its firepower is legendary.
Why Yip used the AK-47 was because we think just at the end of the 70s, China had a war with Vietnam. And in this war, the Chinese military, I think perhaps the Vietnamese military as well, both used the AK-47. So no doubt, it was a weapon that gained a lot of prominence.
With this new weapon, Yip knew he would have the upper hand with the police. He hoped that the AK-47 would propel him to the status of the most dreaded gangster in Hong Kong. In June 1991, Yip Kai-foon returns to Hong Kong, armed with the AK-47, ready to spread terror and panic in the island. His famous heist of robbing 5 jewelry stores in Kwang Tong district was when he was first seen using the sophisticated weapon. After this infamous heist, Yip Kai-foon is officially Hong Kong's most wanted.
He was regarded as a dangerous criminal, not because he himself is dangerous, but because of the weapons he carried.
The police put a bounty of 1 million Hong Kong dollars on his head. They are even more desperate to nab the gangster, who's more menacing than ever. Between 1991 and 1996, Yip Kai-foon unleashes a reign of panic for jewelry store owners in Hong Kong. Armed with AK-47s, Yip and his gang operate with military precision and planning. Stores are looted in broad daylight, without any fear of the police. There's no telling where they will strike next. He's even believed to be operating with some of the biggest criminal gangs to expand on his network of illegal activities.
He was also linked to a criminal gang led by James A. Kern, otherwise known as Big Spender. That gang was believed to have committed a very wide variety of violent crimes, kidnapping, robberies.
Yip's terror spreads with his notoriety. His choice of the AK-47 and its defiant use in public places spreads panic even within the police ranks.
The bravado of using an AK-47 was, merely to demonstrate that I'm stronger than you are.
Faced with these dangerous crooks, the police lack the firepower to stay on top. They seem to be losing the battle on the streets against the gangster.
At that time, the weapons that they had were more powerful in terms of firepower than what the normal police had. We only had at the time the Colt .38 police positive, and that's about as useless as a pea shooter.
Yip Kai-foon's audacious acts also create a sense of intrigue about the man. People of Hong Kong are fascinated by his every move. The media is riveted as well and splash the news of most of his sensational heists on the front pages. They even crown him the King of Thieves.
His role as a leader of a gang, carrying out these daring raids, his flamboyance, the money, his reputation for enjoying a shootout with the police, all of these factors have contributed to making him not only the most wanted man, but a criminal in whom the media were particularly interested.
Yip Kai-foon, the most wanted criminal of Hong Kong, with a reward of 1 million Hong Kong dollars on his head, looted and terrorized the jewelry stores in the island through the early 1990s with impunity. His dramatic appearance on the surveillance camera in 1991 adds to the hype created about the gangster in the local media. all of Hong Kong is mesmerized with this military stance of the gangster, who after robbing 5 jewelry stores, confronts the police and then makes a daredevil escape with his gang in a stolen car.
Because he was filmed, I would like to use the word shot, but maybe it's inappropriate, by the media brandishing his AK-47. I think, all right, that was spectacular, and it made good headlines. But unfortunately, it also perhaps became a rather iconic thing as far as robberies and guns were concerned.
Yip's media portrayal as a daring mobster particularly becomes an iconic image amongst youngsters who are enthralled by the gangster's persona.
One of the concerns of the police at this time was that young people may start to see Yip Kai-Foon and his like as a role model, as a figure who was exciting and daring and standing up to authority. And the best way to deal with that was to capture him and put him in prison and to show that committing these crimes really is not a glamorous affair at all.
Hong Kong police launch a massive hunt to nab Yip and shatter the mystical aura he's created about himself. It's believed that most police officers would even carry Yip's photo in their wallets as a constant reminder of the menace he had spread. But each time they thought they were close to arresting him, the elusive gangster would disappear, seemingly into thin air. The police are now losing hope if they can ever arrest Yip Kai-Foon. He seems invincible. And then suddenly, between 1994 and 1996, Yip vanishes again. He's back home on the mainland. But this time, Yip's plotting what could be his biggest heist of all, a new operation that he is certain will get him even bigger headlines. On May 14th, 1996, Hong Kong's famous Kennedy Town Pier is just waking up to a new day. 2 junior police officers are patrolling the pier, unaware of what's coming in their direction. A group of men on a boat are heading towards Hong Kong. They're heavily armed with guns. Once on shore, they stealthily move inland. When the gang reaches the pier, they head towards the city. Officers spot movement. At first, they think the trespassers are illegal immigrants.
They were looking around. These police officers, Constables Chen and Chan, thought that there was something suspicious about them. They didn't look as if they were familiar with the area. So the police officers stopped them and went to investigate.
The intruders step back, taking cover. The leader of the gang then signals to his men and slowly brings out his own gun.
When the gang were told to stop, they moved away. The police officers heard the clicking of guns, and they issued a warning and eventually opened fire.
Before they know it, the police find themselves in a gun battle, both firing at and being fired upon. At first, the shadowy figures dominate the crossfire. Confident of handling the 2 rookie cops on his own, the leader instructs his men to leave. The gang escapes, leaving behind their boss to deal with the 2 officers. The firing goes on for nearly an hour, when suddenly the gang leader is shot by one of the officers.
The second shot fired by the police officer slowed him down as he was trying to flee. He then span round with his own gun, returning fire, and the third shot was the one that really brought him to the ground.
When the dust settles on the gun battle, the police take a closer look at the man they have shot, but they're unsure of the suspect's identity. It takes the police 24 hours to identify the intruder. They're stunned to discover that the man they've caught is Yip Kai-foon.
At first, the police didn't realize that they had captured Hong Kong's most wanted man. It was only later on, when checks on his identity were conducted, that they realized that these two police officers had quite by chance managed to arrest Hong Kong's #1 target. Yip Kai-foon was shot 3 times. One bullet lodged in his spine, causing the most serious injury. He was also shot in his side and under his armpit.
In Yip's bag, police discover guns, about 2 kilograms of military explosive, and large quantities of ammunition. The gangster had evidently planned a potentially devastating operation. Yip Kai-foon's arrest creates hysteria in the Hong Kong media. He becomes a prized trophy. The man that terrorized Hong Kong's streets for so long is back in jail. In 1997, amidst tight security, the trial begins to convict the most dreaded criminal of Hong Kong.
Here was Hong Kong's most wanted man, someone who was regarded as a gang leader who had already escaped from custody, so security was a big issue. Even after he'd been shot, he was paralysed. During the course of the legal proceedings, he showed that he was still determined to fight.
But for the Hong Kong police and the prosecutors, there's a big problem. They don't have enough hard evidence to link Yip to the jewel heists. How will the Hong Kong prosecutors convict the King of Thieves for his biggest crimes? In May 1996, the most wanted criminal of Hong Kong, Yip Kai-foon, is finally caught by the police in a chance encounter at the Kennedy Town Pier. Yip is seriously wounded by the police and is paralyzed for life. But despite his physical condition, he is still perceived as a threat. Nearly a year after Yip's arrest, his controversial trial starts in February 1997. Hong Kong police carefully prepare the charges against the gangster.
Well, I'm sure the police would have loved to have prosecuted Yip for the armed robberies he is believed to have committed in the early 1990s and also in the early 1980s. But put simply, they did not have sufficient evidence to put him on trial and to secure a conviction. So despite his portrayal as the king of robbery, he has never been convicted of that offence.
But there is a solution. Yip was loaded with ammunition and weapons when he was captured, so he's charged with the possession of deadly explosives. If found guilty, he could serve a life sentence.
He was charged with a number of offences, using firearms to resist arrest, possession of explosives. He was caught with 9 blocks of TNT, quite a haul of explosives. And of course he was also charged with escaping from custody in 1989, a serious offence in itself.
Buttle was covering the trial for South China Morning Post. He was astonished when he finally set eyes on the audacious King of Thieves, who had terrorized Hong Kong for nearly a decade.
Yip Kai-foon appeared as a beaten man when he appeared in court for his trial. What you actually saw when you sat in court was a man who was suffering from terrible injuries. He'd been shot by the police, he was paralysed from the waist down, he had lost a great deal of weight.
In March 1997, a wheelchair-bound Yip Kai-foon is sentenced to 41 years. he's sent back to Stanley Prison, where he had escaped from in 1989. But even as a prisoner, he continues to attract media attention.
But it's very difficult to keep Yip out of the headlines. In 2003, he was married in prison. He was allowed to put on his own clothes, to exchange rings with a wife from mainland China. And then even last year, he is back in court again. This time for assaulting a prison officer in custody. Some of the publicity was fantasy. It was fiction. It was not based on fact.
Fact or fiction, Yip's notoriety made him a legend. His dramatic heists and bold capers mesmerized the local people. For many in Hong Kong, he is still a source of fascination. But police officer James Elms angrily dismisses any attempt to make Yip a hero.
Yip Kai-Fun, as far as I'm concerned, is no different from any other criminal. He did it for money. He didn't do it as Robin Hood did to distribute to the poor.
Yip has paid a heavy price for a life of crime. His sentence has been reduced to 36 years, but Yip continues to appeal on humanitarian grounds. One person who agreed to help him with this case is local legislator Leung Yu Chung.
I was very surprised when I received a letter from叶繼歡because I never think that this guy would send me a letter, and I don't know what he wants.
Chung remembers his first visit with the former gangster.
From his face, you can't tell he's a bad guy. He was very nice. He was very kind as well, and when you talk with him, it's very polite.
Chung has met Yip many times since 2005. The jewel thief talked frequently about life back on the mainland.
Because he got a daughter and a wife and in China, and he really want to stay together with them. So he said, is there any possible for him to have the early release?
Leung Yu Chung does believe that Yip Kai-Fun is a changed man. And he's not the only one who is convinced by this new outlook.
There is genuine repentance in prison, definitely. There are people who are suffering under the weight, under the burden of the crime that they have committed. They know very much that they have brought pain and suffering on another family, on their own family also.
Reverend Tobias Brandner is the chaplain at Stanley Prison. He seems to have a profound impact on Yip's thinking.
I have baptized Yip Kai-Fun in prison, and I believe I wouldn't have done it if I had not believed that he has turned to Christianity.
The former gangster has written a 5-page letter of regret that was recently published in a Christian Missionaries magazine. In this letter, he acknowledges his misdeeds and repents his actions. He's now frail and sickly and nearly 50 years old, living the life of an imprisoned paraplegic. He can only hope for an early release to be reunited with his family.
He said he wants to be a good husband, good father, and to be a good man in the future. His daughter is studying very well in the school, and also want to be a lawyer in the future. And he said, want to be a happy family in the future.
Once infamous as Hong Kong's biggest jewel thief, Yip Kai-Fun resembles an old man who spends most of his time praying. He hopes for repentance, but the Hong Kong authorities have shown little interest in granting it to him. Yip Kai-Fun is in for a long stretch.